Thanks for inviting me to this seminar. So in this talk, I will discuss my recent work on large language models for code generation. In particular, I want to emphasize the importance of leveraging execution feedback to improve code generation performance. So nowadays, we have seen a lot of success of text-to-code generation with large language models. So the first very impressive demo of these language models for code is from OpenAI Codex. So here we can see that basically we can give the model a pretty detailed natural language instruction to tell it about what's the program we want it to write. Then given this natural language instruction, this Codex model is able to follow the instruction line by line, and actually can also get these details of parameters, etc., pretty accurately. So for many real-world use case, natural language alone might not be sufficient to fully describe the intended program functionality. So besides natural language, another very helpful specification format is input-output examples, which specifies the concrete execution behavior of the code. So in this talk, I will also discuss the project AlphaCode. So I worked on this project when I interned at DeepMind at that time. So basically in the AlphaCode project, we will show the performance of language models for competitive programming. And we demonstrate that actually by properly leveraging the execution behavior of the code, then we can get the model to achieve pretty competitive performance on solving very challenging algorithmic reasoning problems. So the ability of program synthesis with large language models is not only helpful for software engineering applications, it can also be used to trigger other functionality, which will be helpful for solving many challenging reasoning problems. So one use case is that we can leverage the language model to execute those code which are wrapped in the format of tools. So here I'm showing one demo where basically this ChatGPT model is trying to generating the code represented in the Wolfram language. So Wolfram is basically a website which is able to solve many kind of hard reasoning problems that require some domain knowledge, like geometry, chemistry, etc. So basically here we can show that by asking the model to call off Wolfram API, it is able to basically use it to basically get access to very specialized knowledge, so that it can solve some more further expert level problems more accurately. So leveraging existing tools is one first step. So in our recent work, large language models as tool makers, we further show that we can also leverage these large language models to make their own tools. Well, these tools are represented as Python functions in our case. So basically the idea is that we can use the more powerful large language model as the tool maker, so that it can propose those tools by generating the Python functions. And once they basically pass some unit tests, we consider these tools to be helpful. Then with these generated tools, we show that we can use a weaker or a cheaper language model to apply these tools, whereas this combination can still achieve the same level of performance as the stronger model with a much a cheaper cost. But with all the success of the current language models for many use case of code generation, there are still a lot of challenges remains. So one clear challenge is that so far competitive programming remains very difficult for large language models without a proper design. So this here on the slide, I'm showing a table quoted from the GPT-4 technical report. So you can see that GPT-4 achieves very impressive performance on many standard exams like SAT, GRE. But on the Codeforces benchmark, if we do not have any design for prompting or training, then basically the performance is below 5% of all the users. So basically, when we deploy this GPT-4 model to participate in those Codeforces competitions, So usually for those new problems, the model cannot solve any of them, even for the easiest problems for humans. Another weakness of current language model is that they can even fail on simple coding problems because they are still not great at understanding code execution. So here I'm showing one example. So this example is basically just asking the model to kind of compare the two arguments given to the function. If the first argument is like larger than the second argument, the code should return none. Otherwise, it returns the difference. So the description itself is pretty clear. So if we look at the generated code, the semantic meaning is close, except that basically it flips the orders of these like two arguments. So this basically means that indeed right now the model is better at understanding the text than actually precisely following the intended execution behavior represented as input-output examples. So facing these challenges, in this talk, I will mainly discuss two projects which aim to like really leverage the external execution so that it can help the model to kind of mitigate this weakness and improve the performance on solving challenging coding problems and also more broader code generation applications. So in the first part, I will discuss the work AlphaCode, and I will especially emphasize the importance of leveraging execution feedback for improving the performance. In the second part, I'll further discuss our most recent work on teaching the large language models to debug its own code by using both execution and also by asking the model to reflect on the semantic meaning of the generated code. So let's get started with the first part on the AlphaCode project. Here I want to show one more details on an example of competitive programming problem. So the actual problem here does not matter that much, but you can see that basically compared to many current coding benchmarks, like especially human eval MBPP, those are very short program description to translate the text into a Python function. But here we can see that because these competitive programming problems are designed to even confuse top human programmers. So basically, we can see that this text description is very long and complicated, includes a lot of background story before introducing the functionality we really want for the intended code. And also, besides this text description, we have this input-output specification, which shows the concrete execution we want. Then, given this problem description, then we ask the model to generate the resulting code. So here I'm showing you one example where the AlphaCode can generate the correct solution. So basically, if we look at this code, we can see that it is definitely non-trivial. It has some kind of control flow structures here. And the more important feature is that there's no direct mapping between the problem description and output code. So it is not a simple instruction following to basically translate the problem description line by line to the code. And besides following the intended functionality of the code, we also want this generated code to have a pretty good complexity because in many cases the model also needs the solution to generalize to those larger scale test cases so that it will be executed in a reasonable time limit. So given this very challenging task, what we can achieve now? So basically, we evaluate the final AlphaCode model on Codeforces platform, where we ask it to participate in 10 competitions with over 5,000 human programmers. So our final model is an ensemble of the 41 billion and 9 billion models. And basically, for each problem, we allow the model to send 10 submissions to the platform. So here is the overall curve. So basically, we can see that among the 10 contests, the average ranking of the AlphaCode model is among the top 54.3%, so roughly average performance overall. And if we consider this aggregated rating among all the Codeforces users, it is actually top 28%. So clearly, at the point of this project wrap up, So this performance is definitely still very far away from the top like human programmers. But still, we consider it to be an important milestone because it really demonstrates that the model is able to solve some new unseen algorithmic reasoning problems and also achieves pretty reasonable performance on this task. So given these results, one natural follow-up question is whether further scaling on the model will just solve more problems. Because for example, in the first like GPT-3 models, we can see that the parameter size is around 175 billion. And also for the Google first version of PaLM model, it already has 540 billion parameters. So to answer this question, here I'm showing this scaling curve. So if we compare different curves, especially by comparing the red and purple curves corresponding to 9 billion and 41 billion models, we can see that the performance gain becomes like less and less significant when we further scale out models. Another point I want to emphasize is this point where we only allow each model to decode 10 programs per problem. So you can see that with such a small sampling budget, no model can achieve really reasonable performance. So the accuracy is pretty close to zero. So does it contradict to the previous like the results? We show that basically each model can the model can get pretty good performance with only 10 final submissions. So the answer is that basically for these 10 final submissions, they come from much more initial samples to select from. And for this implementation, basically we ask the model to generate 1 million candidates per problem. So then we do some like ranking based on execution to select 10 final programs. So here is an overview of this AlphaCode framework. So basically we see that there are a lot of design choices here. So we have this pre-training stage where we pre-train the AlphaCode model on the GitHub corpus. Then there's a fine-tuning stage where the team constructs this code context dataset, including the programs and the ground truth solutions. So after the model is trained, there's also a procedure of doing sampling and evaluation, where basically we sample a lot of candidate solutions, and there's a filtering and clustering procedure to give us the final 10 submissions. So in this talk, I will focus on this part of filtering and clustering to show how we can leverage program execution to improve the performance. So the first stage is called filtering. So basically because for each program description, it usually comes with at least one or sometimes also 2 to 3 example tests. So we execute all these candidate programs on these like input-output pairs in the program description. Then we filter out those samples that do not pass the test. Notice here, because for all these like competitive program problems, we also have the hidden test cases, which are usually more challenging than these example tests. So this means that this filtering doesn't mean that the remaining solutions are always like accurate for the full evaluation. For evaluation, we actually show that even with this very simple filtering, it already filtered out over 99% of the sampling pools. So basically, this also shows that the language model itself is not really like they're not really capable of precisely following these like execution specification written in the program description. So as a result, it even cannot like pass those like tests that are clearly written as the model input. But if we consider the initial pool of 1 million programs per problem, after this filtering procedure, there are still usually around 1,000 programs remain. So basically, to select the 10 final submissions from this like 1,000 pool, we still need another procedure called clustering. So recall that basically the challenge here is that the hidden tests for test programs are not available. So to basically to solve this challenge, we train another model to generate new test inputs for the test programs. So the idea is that we will reuse the AlphaCode model architecture, but this time the training objective is like this. So because we already have a training data set, which includes the ground truth programs. So this means that at least for the training programs, we will have a much more like test cases for us for training. So basically, we will use these like test descriptions along with the example test as the model input, and the model will generate those like inputs to the problem description. So note that here we only need a model to generate inputs rather than the outputs, because basically the outputs can be just obtained by executing the code. So basically, the requirement here is that the generated inputs should like follow the style of the intended program input. So basically, it means that it can kind of understand what are some common like, features of the example test given in the problem description, and also this problem description itself can help the model to decide what kind of inputs can be like desired for such problems. Then basically we will execute the remaining programs on all these generated inputs. Then we will cluster all programs with the same outputs together. So the idea here is that let's say if we can have the model to generate or at least 100 to 200 unit tests per problem, then if two programs always have the same output for all of them, then we can approximately assume that they are semantically equivalent. In this case, basically, when we submit the programs to the platform, we just need to sample one program from each cluster. And basically here we will select the 10 largest clusters. If there are more than 10 clusters, the intuition is that usually the correct solutions will be like more like concentrated, while the wrong solutions can usually be wrong in many different ways. So now I want to show the results of this like filtering and clustering. So first, if we compare this like red curve to other curve, we can see that filtering with execution is crucial because like most of the programs cannot even pass the sample test. Then if we look at the bottom table and compare the performance of 9 billion, 41 billion, and 41 billion with clustering, we can see that actually this clustering procedure can improve performance more than simply scaling out the model. So this also emphasizes the importance of leveraging the execution results. But if we compare these results with the Oracle curve in blue, which means that basically we will assume an Oracle setting where we can just put all the 1 million candidates for the final evaluation. So this is basically an Oracle assumption. So you can see that there's still a gap to this Oracle results. So this also means that there are still room for improvement to basically increase the accuracy of this re-ranking procedure. Besides the Codeforces problems, we also evaluate our approach on the apps dataset. So apps is another code generation benchmark where it includes problems of more varied difficulty. So it includes the introductory problems and also include these competitive level problems. So we can see that with the 1 billion AlphaCode model, it can outperform the GPT-Neo model, which is 2 times larger. And also the performance is comparable to the Codex 12 billion model. So this further shows that there can be some training execution techniques that can improve the model more than simply scaling out the model. So to summarize, in the first part, I showed that leveraging execution results can improve the complexity of the syntax programs by when the import examples are given as part of the problem description. So for the second part, I will discuss my work on self-debugging. But before that, I wonder if there's any question about the AlphaCode project. Yeah, if not, I can also proceed to the second project and we can leave all the questions to the end. So recall that at the beginning, I mentioned that the large language model that do not always get the right code in the first round. This can be sometimes because the problem is too challenging, and sometimes because the model can make some like some like small mistakes here and there, and it does not understand the execution very precisely. So to like deal with this issue, we can see that the AlphaCode approach is basically saying that instead of just asking the model to generate one solution, we can ask the model to generate many solutions. Then we can have another round of code selection to pick one final one or a few like a final candidates for presenting to the users or for evaluation. But one limitation is that in this way, the sample efficiency is suboptimal. Because first, to do this like code ranking or selection, it typically requires a lot of model samples to get like decent performance improvement. And the core like limitation here is that this code selection does not really like utilize any like feedback to improve the code quality, because basically all these code or these candidate programs are independently generated. This means that the same raw code can be sampled multiple times, and because of that, so there's like no way for the model to really like utilize any like external feedback to directly improve the code quality itself. It needs to fully rely on the initial sampling quality of these candidate programs. But on the other hand, if we think about us as human programmers, so human written code in the first round also might not be perfect. So this is why debugging is such an important skill, even for the best human programmers. So basically, good programmers are usually able to identify the bugs by themselves. And this can be done by investigating into the execution results and also think deeply and thoughtfully about the code semantic meaning. So in our recent self-debug project, we show that we can also teach the large language models to debug their own predicted code in a procedure of basically reminiscent of robot duck debugging. So the intuition here is that basically for robot duck debugging, it means that you don't need anyone to like write code with you or give you the expert feedback. But basically, when you encounter any like issues in your code, what you can do is that you can talk to something or a robot duck about what the code is doing line by line. Then in many cases, while you are explaining the code, you will realize what's the issue here. So why does it like have any like issues in the final results, and why it is inconsistent with what you want. So we want to teach the model to also debug their code in this way. So here I'm showing the overview of this like self-debugging framework. So basically, in each debugging step, the model first generates the code. Then we can execute the code to get the execution results or some runtime error messages. And in the third step, we also prompt the model to explain the code line by line. So the intuition here is that in many cases, the model might not generate the correct code, or it cannot explain the error message very well. But if we only ask the model to explain the code, actually the explanation is usually of high quality for like for different like large language models for code. So usually this explanation can be another helpful signal for the model to decide the next step. So basically, given this execution result with the model generated explanation, we will then prompt the model to generate a feedback message. So it will guess whether its own predicted code is already correct or not. So if you consider the code to be correct, then this debugging loop stops. Otherwise, this feedback message will then be fed into the model to perform the next round of debugging. And also, if the debugging still does not work after a couple of steps, the process will also stop. So I see one question. Are there any known results on the effectiveness of the robot duck technique for human programmers? I personally did not like do any like study on it, but I think there are some books and also some like probably also some like some papers in the software engineering community to discuss about this behavior. So I personally think this is helpful for me, but there might be some also more regular study about like how it works for general like software engineers and also for programmers with the different level of expertise. Yeah, thanks for the question.
And maybe just another question. Did I get that right? That the AI determines by itself if the code is correct?
Yeah. So yeah.
Okay, and that works reasonably well, because I could imagine that it's quite bad at like codecs or like GPT-4 and GPT 3.5. They usually are wrong, but confidently wrong. So I would expect that it just says like the code is wrong, even though it fails.
Yeah, this is why we actually later on I will show more results. So the first thing is that for the current results I show in this presentation, it is on I show the results on Codeforces 002. So this is a version of the GPT model without any like RLHF or instruction tuning. So which means that the reason why I call this paper teach language model to self-debug is because that model itself does not do any. It's not directly heavily trained on debugging. So if you naively ask the model to say, tell me whether the model is correct, the model will give you nothing. But this process can be done if you ask the model to generate some more explanations, and it will help improve performance. And later on, if we have extra time, I will also talk about some like my ongoing like experiments, or where I also evaluate on like GPT 3.5 trouble and GPT-4, and we can discuss more on that. Yeah,
okay,
thanks for the question. Yeah, definitely this is something we are already like considering for this kind of work on self-debugging, self-improvement, etc. So here I'm showing very simple demo with the Google Bot model. So this is the same example as I showed before. So the problem description itself is simple, but it has this like a tricky feature of execution where the model usually will get it wrong. So here also the bot model generates the initial code wrong, where basically it also wrongly flips the order of the two arguments of function. Now here I'm showing one like simple debugging message. Basically it states that the execution result is like some number, but assertion is another result. So basically it does not pass the assertion. Please fix it. Then with this like information, then the model can quickly know that basically this if condition is wrong, so it fixed this if condition. So in this case, the final code is accurate. So now I will show more regular stack evaluation pipeline of this work. So first, I show this application of text-to-SQL generation. So I personally think text-to-SQL is also a very important like application. Also, in general, SQL is a less popular programming language compared to Python. So basically, here for text-to-SQL, there's one challenge is that usually we expect this model to be able to achieve cross-domain generalization, which means that we do not want the model to only work on one specific database. We want it to work on all kinds of databases and to handle all kinds of problems. So this basically means that each question can require different database information. So basically, usually for text-to-SQL problems, the prompt for large language models will be pretty long because it usually includes all these like related database schemas. So another challenge is that for debugging purpose, there's no unit test for text-to-SQL. So because we really want the final resulting table, so this is definitely not included in part of the question description. So this means that basically the model needs to fully infer the code correctness by itself. So our approach here is to basically perform the self-debugging with very detailed explanation of the code to basically identify the potential inconsistency between the final code and also the question. So let's see one example of how it works. So first, we will ask the model to explain the question and the generated code. So the purpose of explaining the question is because for the natural language question, there can be a lot of variance. So we basically in the explanation, we want the model to clearly explains what is the return type. Here basically it means what's the size of the table, and also it needs to rephrase the question in a more standard form if the question is has some other irrelevant information in the description. And the second step is called code explanation. So basically here we also give the execution result of the SQL on the database. Then basically the model will explain the SQL related to the execution results. So we can see that this is actually a pretty like close by a close by explanation of the SQL. So it explains the what are the columns selected, what's the size of the table, and also what does this where condition represented, and so which kind of columns will be selected. So one interesting thing is that because here we are using Codeforces 002 for experiments, so for all these steps we use usual prompting so that the model can generate what we want. But for the code explanation part, because these models are already so good at understanding this, at least this like line by line semantic meaning. So actually, when I write the prompt, I basically start with a 0 prompt to ask the model to explain the code. Then basically, the purpose of the future examples is to just make sure that for the final iteration, this explanation are all in a canonical form. But actually, the model itself is already very good at understanding each clause. So basically, it also means that the annotation cost here can be very low. So if we compare like these like two questions, we can see that actually this SQL is a wrong prediction for the question, because the question is asking about customers who have both on-road and shipped as order status. But we can see that from the SQL query, clearly this where is calling the all operator. So it is not like it basically is instead choosing those like customers with either on-road or shipped as order status. So with the initial explanation, then basically the model will summarize both the question and code explanation. Then basically, given this explanation, the model will predict a feedback message saying that basically the SQL prediction is wrong. Please fix it. Then in the second round, basically the idea is that in a where clause, the two conditions are mutually exclusive, but there's an AND operator, which means that this table will always be empty. So this is again another wrong SQL prediction. Then in the second round of the debugging, basically this time the model correctly uses the intersect operator, so the final SQL prediction is correct. The second application is code translation. So here I'm showing you an example of translating from C++ to Python code. Because here we already have the source program as a reference, which shows the intended execution. So basically here we can assume that all these unit tests are available for debugging. So this means that for this task, the language model does not need to infer the code correctness itself. It just needs to focus on basically inferring how to fix the code. So for those tasks with the unit tests available, we can also include this unit test results as the feedback message. So basically here we investigate several different options for the feedback message. The first version is called like a simple feedback. So this is a very short universal feedback. So basically the feedback will just say that the code is correct or the code is wrong. So there's no specific information about any code. The unit test feedback basically means that we will include the execution results in the feedback message. So this can be like the wrong execution result or any error messages for the execution. So here the code explanation, again, it will be a line-by-line explanation of the implementation. And again, because like these models are very good at understanding these like common program languages. So this actually this explanation style kind of follows the codex, the own generation of the codex model without any example. So here is the overall picture. So basically, for this debugging loop, we will first have a high-level instruction saying that we want to correct all the currently predicted code using the provided feedback. Then basically we can have these feedback messages appended to the prompt turn by turn. Finally, we also evaluate the task of text to Python generation. So here we are using this MBPP benchmark. We assume this setup. So basically, for MBPP benchmark, each program has 3 unit tests. So we include 1 unit test in the prompt and 2 hidden unit tests for evaluation. And because we do not give all unit tests in the prompt, So this also means that passing a given unit test does not necessarily say that the predicted code is fully accurate. So basically, the model can utilize the given unit test to do some like to indicate whether the code is definitely wrong if the unit test cannot even pass. But still, even if the model passes the given unit test, it still needs to infer whether the final code can be accurate. So here I'm showing the overall like tables of the key results. So basically for these tables, they are all using the CodeAventure 002 model for both initial code generation and also for self-debugging process. Here for the baseline results, when we say that the baseline use multiple programs, it also for selecting the final code, here we are doing the majority vote of execution results. So this is related to the AlphaCode project. So we can see that when the unit tests are not available, for example, in the case of text-to-SQL generation, then the improvement of self-debugging overall is 3%. But later on, I will show that with the evaluation studies, actually, on those harder problems, the improvement can be more significant. And when the model is able to leverage at least part of the unit test, then the improvement can be over 7%. So now I want to show some like evaluation studies about like different design choices of self-debugging and also different aspects of how the results already improve. So the first like result is about sample efficiency. So here, for example, if we compare the baseline results of like let's say 16 samples with the self-debugging results starting from one sample, we can see that the performance can be pretty close. So this basically shows that self-debugging from gradient decoding can already match the baseline performance, which might use like around like 10 times of the samples. Then the next question is about how many turns is required for self-debugging. So here I'm showing this curve for code translation, and actually this trend also holds for other benchmarks. So basically here we show that in general, the majority of the improvement comes within the first turn. So this also shows that basically this debugging cost can be low because we only need one turn to get the major improvement. And then for the text-to-SQL task, basically this benchmark called Spider, it already has these different categories of difficulty levels. So this difficulty level is determined based on the complexity of the resulting SQL query. So basically here I'm also showing an evaluation study of the text-to-SQL performance on those questions with different difficulty level. So if we look at the extra hard category, which represents the most complicated SQL tasks, so you can see that actually self-debugging can give us 9% of improvement on these problems. So the main reason here is that in general, for these language models, at least for text-to-SQL and also for text-to-Python tasks, usually the prediction itself won't be completely off. But especially for text-to-SQL queries where the SQL can have a lot of like nested clauses or a lot of conditions, the model typically will miss some conditions or some clauses here and there. So so this issue cannot be that easy to solve with reasonable sampling cost. But if you basically if the model can identify such kind of discrepancy based on explaining the code, the SQL query, and also by comparing it to a question, then the model can easily like make some small fixes to really bridge this gap. So this is why actually this self-debugging process can give more improvement on these like harder text-to-SQL problems. So basically, in the second part of the talk, I show that we can teach the large language models to self-debug with the self-generated code explanations and also by leveraging the execution. And this can be done even if the language model itself was not specially tuned for debugging. So basically, if the model is powerful enough to understand the future examples, we can also teach the model to do this procedure with future prompting. So to summarize, basically in this talk, I first discussed our AlphaCode project, where we show that we can really move from those like short instruction following to algorithmic reasoning, where we can basically design the procedure so that the model can leverage those execution to improve its own performance and also to decide which solution is better than others. Then for the self-debugging project, we show that we can teach the large language models to perform robot-duck debugging. So this process can be done with code execution and also self-generated code explanations. And the common challenge I want to address here is to really improve sample efficiency of large language models for code. And this will be very important for solving those like more challenging coding tasks. So in general, we design these procedures of leverage execution feedback. So that for the real world use case, it is also helpful for the language models to really understand other kinds of user feedback. But execution specifically for code is one helpful feedback which can be automatically generated, and also this can be done in a loop without humans involved in. So basically, the final goal is that I want the model to generate correct and complicated programs within a few samples. So let's say if the model can really just generate one program, and it can magically solve a lot of competitive programming problems, which is closer to how top human programmers solve problems in this context, then it will be very cool. So this is the end of the talk. Thanks everyone for listening. And now I think we can move on to this to have some more to basically answer some more questions and have more follow-up discussion. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question. So, yeah, this self-debugging looks very good. But my question is, are there some problems that might be hard to debug? For example, if the input outputs are just floating points, maybe you say that the output, the actual output is different from the expected output, but the model is hard to figure out this mismatch or this relation, and it may be hard to get a correct code after knowing the wrong solution. And in these cases, will directly sampling more programs be better?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So the first thing is about the format of this input pairs. So actually, in most of these programs like text to Python generation, the result can be floating points. So the model doesn't really need to know so basically whether the format is integer or float or floating numbers or strings. This format itself does not basically really determine the complexity of a debugging process. The model just needs to know whether it is correct or not, and this correct or not part can be done by just kind of extend match if the unit test are already available in the program description. Then the further task is basically for those very challenging problems, then whether this debugging process can really help the model to basically fix the issue. So one thing we can consider is that basically for this self-debugging procedure, in the worst case, the model can just sample another completely new code irrelevant to the input code. So this is also one difference of basically designing these large language models for code for self-debugging compared to earlier works. For example, I personally also work on earlier projects where we try to train one deep neural network to perform code repair for some kind of program synthesis task. So at that time, basically what we are doing is that we can design some edit operations, so which means that we can add one code line or delete some tokens. But in that case, basically because we have this edit space, the model tends to generate something syntactically closer to the input code. But here, because it is large language models, and we do not really, we did not really tell the model to just it has to generate something based on the input code. We just ask it to fix it. So in the worst case, at least I would say like putting this additional like code in the context does not like it won't make things worse. It is just about you are practically indeed you are putting more tokens in the input, which will if you are calling whether you are calling it API or you are calling them one like model which you have full access to. So this definitely will it just increase the inference cost if it does not help the performance improvement.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Do you have an intuition why unit tests or unit tests plus explanation, why the explanation part adds so little to the performance? Like I would have expected, since explanations are so long and you need to somehow explain failures in unit tests, that it adds a lot of performance, but it apparently does not, right?
Yeah, this is a great question, and especially I would say one thing is that for let me just go back to that slide, the result slide. Yeah, so yeah, it's especially for like this text to Python generation. Indeed, the improvement here is pretty like marginal. The thing is that because usually the unit tests themselves are already informative enough if they are already presenting the problem description. So they already tell a lot about like whether the code is correct or not, and especially because this MVP benchmark itself is so basically it is the difficulty of the given unit test and the hidden unit test are the same. So basically, it also suggests that passing the given unit test itself usually already indicates that it is a final correct prediction. So this is why here, Agnes' explanation itself does not help the model a lot about understanding whether the code is actually correct or not. And also another thing is indeed, so basically, because for current large language models, right now there are a lot of efforts on like long context learning. But when the context is unnecessarily long, indeed it also these like models might also not be able to understand them very accurately. So this is why usually this like explanation will help more when the model cannot use any other information or execution to tell it whether the code is correct or not. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Thank you. And since, I mean, you're generating so much data and so much feedback, do you think it would be possible to train the language model directly on that feedback? Because, I mean, you could just sample good explanations and cases where the debugging process went perfectly and then train on those tokens, right?
Yeah, so basically for this project, for each task, the number of examples I wrote is definitely not like enough for training. For example, for MBPP and also for this like code translation, there are only like 2 to 3 examples in total. And for Spider, I think it is 5 examples for generating the initial SQL queries, and also at the scale of like 10 to 20 examples for debugging. So this is definitely not enough for training. So I can imagine that if we put more efforts to like collect more data or just utilize the training data set for these benchmarks to basically train another separate model, then it definitely will help improve performance on these specific benchmarks. But the reason why like people usually, unless we are doing a very large scale instruction tuning on very diverse tasks, the reason why right now people do not really do a lot on like most like this like fine tuning on one specific data sets, because we expect this large language model to be good at many different domains, and we don't want it to be like more to overfit to one specific data set. So the goal of self-debugging is to really show that it can work for multiple domains and without any like specialized training on any of them.
Okay, that sounds very sensible. Maybe one last question. Since the simple feedback already has such a huge improvement and you don't need to execute any code for that, you think you could like let the language model teach itself iteratively, like would that significantly improve performance without any other input? Because
Yeah,
you can just
here I want-
train the simple speech check, right?
Yeah, here I want to clarify one thing. So for simple feedback on code translation and also text to Python generation, it already uses the execution to decide whether the code is correct or not. The only difference here is that because it gets this correct or not, and the feedback only says correct or not without putting back the unit test result. So this is why, as you can see, simple feedback improves the code translation and text to Python generation, but not for text to SQL. Because interestingly, actually, I find that if I do the future prompting with this simple feedback, the model will always say the SQL is correct or not for each question, independent of the result is SQL. So it does not really help because the feedback will not change. So basically, this simple feedback is just yeah. So this will basically, it also tells that the model cannot really understand the correctness of the input code without other external signals.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think there are some questions in yeah, thanks. Right, exactly, because we do not want to overfit to the training data. So let's say if we train on this like these benchmarks with more training samples, we also need to think about a new evaluation data set so that it is not like within the same domain of the training data.